I walked into POGO, into an office that was no more than 2 employees, a copier, a fax machine that you've already heard about, a few rooms, and a bathroom that actually doubled as our kitchen. At the time, there was actually a coffee pot in the microwave that was in there. I was started as an unpaid intern, and at that point, I was eventually shuffled off to this little side room, and that room was so small that if I actually scooched out more than about an inch or two from my desk, my chair hit the back wall. And so this was all 1993, and I started as an unpaid intern and worked my way up to a researcher and investigator, and eventually came back as a general counsel. Not exactly the start of a professional career that I expected, but it was a job. One of the first projects that I was assigned to work on when I got there was taking a look at some allegations that we had received from an Environmental Protection Agency scientist who for years had been concerned about the dangerous impacts and the risks that were caused by aerosol products, aerosol cans. We take all these products for granted. They're in our, probably under our sink in our kitchen, they're stored in our garage, in our utility room. But this gentleman knew what the problems were. And despite his efforts within the EPA wasn't doing anything about it. And that was probably the most concerning part of this. I was always a bit skeptical because you kind of know, as kids, you're kind of lighting things on fire, you're doing certain things, but you always worried certainly about aerosol products, about puncturing them and everything else, because you were always afraid that you'd blow your hand off like a firecracker. But the problem was that since the 1970s, the EPA and we knew that the aerosol cans and the propellants in aerosol cans were a product that was depleting the ozone layer. And so there was a big switch at that point to replace those ozone depleting propellants with propane and butane. Most of you probably don't know that. Most of you are probably going to grill this weekend and use a propane tank to light your gas grill, right? And so at that point, yes, you're going to do it. And so now you know how flammable that product can be in an aerosol can. And so we were actually approached by not only our EPA official, but we were also approached by a former New York City fire official who also was concerned. And he had actually documented just in New York City that there were hundreds of fires annually and explosions annually that were caused by aerosol products. But again, the EPA wasn't doing anything about it, and the aerosol industry didn't want you to know how dangerous these products actually were. It was about that time, POGO, I think, turned about 6. I was probably about 16 or 17 running around central Pennsylvania at the time, so we are going to take this back just a little bit. And at that point, you had the EPA decided it wanted to do something and improve warning labels that were on aerosol products. And of course, the aerosol industry said no and threatened to sue them. And as many of you probably are expecting me to say, what did the government do? The government backed off. They caved. For a few more years, the government collected additional data on more fires and explosions that were caused by aerosol cans. And again, the EPA was sluggish in moving forward. You'll finally get it eventually that there's a bug theme going on somewhere in here. But enter our hero, POGO. It was about this time, I think, in history that will go down as the BI, before internet. So as a researcher, I was often sent out to government reading rooms. Not the most delightful places in the world. And so I would go off, I had a little black briefcase that Keith and Danielle still make fun of me for carrying around at the time, and I would take my little black briefcase and I'd wander off into remote DC locations looking for any evidence at all that the EPA was cozy with the aerosol manufacturers. Well, that wasn't too hard. I reviewed documents about spray paint, hairspray. It's amazing how many people smoke while you're getting ready for the evening and we're causing a major fire explosion. Bug repellents. Jim, thank you for the joke on the grasshopper. Soon I realized that one of the most dangerous products that was on the market was something called a total release fogger, also known as a bug bomb. Bug bomb is probably, the best name for it. And that was the real threat. They may take out pesky roaches, but we also found out that they were taking out people's homes. A lot of these people were low income, and this was the affordable way that they could eradicate roaches and bugs in their homes if they couldn't afford an exterminator. Well, these bug bombs would actually, they were also used by a lot of people that were in big cities and also that live in an apartment. So you can imagine this isn't always a single family home, but a fire and explosion in an apartment complex in New York can do some major damage and put some people, and inconvenience a lot of people there. Just so you know, a bug bomb, and I don't want to get into the science of it, but the total release makes sense. It actually is an item that you would set on the floor, you would set a few of them off, and you would actually leave, and it would release the entire contents of the product. And when that's the propellant, so that's where our propane and butane come from, and that's whatever is gonna crawl into the holes and nooks and crannies in your couches and in your carpets and get into your cabinetry to kill all the roaches that were there. But the problem was that these bug bombs could be ignited with even the smallest of ignition sources. And when I say smallest, static electricity, a refrigerator kicking on, and back in the old days, a pilot light. As for the older people in the room, they will remember pilot lights stayed on. And so there was a lot of misuse with these products because people didn't really know how to use them. And so I reviewed all these documents, and I went through banker's boxes, I went through extended oversized filing cabinets of aged EPA and industry documents. Paper cuts were always a risk, but for the most part, some of these documents just had a real musty odor, either from the fact that they were down in probably the basements of the EPA or the fact that people were still probably smoking in their government offices at the time, I don't know. I would take a break every once in a while when flammability data, is not the funnest thing in the world, would float around on pages, and I would do my best to try to make heads or tails of it. But my hope was always that I would find some kind of documentation that neither the EPA nor the industry wanted me to find. Our sources were great on this. I mean, we had a guy inside the EPA, we had a fire official. They helped me track down documents, they told me what to FOIA, and every once in a while, Keith and I would get in the mail an old VHS tape. I had to bring it because I didn't even know half our staff even knows what a VHS tape is. So at that point, we would get those, and Keith and I would figure, hey, this is perfect, this is what we're gonna do for lunch. So we pull our lunch out and we'd watch these VHS tapes, and it would be an hour of explosions and experiments. They were containers, there were 55-gallon drums that would either catch fire or explode apart, all with a bottle of hairspray or some of these total release, these bug bombs. And our New York City Fire Department official, he actually wintered in Florida. So a lot of times I was always sitting there, as Danielle described the scenery of our office, there wasn't much to look at. And so I was always picturing this guy's probably sitting out in a Hawaiian shirt and in his jams, that's what they were called back in that time, that era. In his jams, and here I'm probably sitting around in my old beat up, wool turtleneck sweater that I bought from the Gap. He's at his pool, and here I'm looking at this dilapidated building that we were living in. But our sources didn't want fortune and fame. They really just wanted to protect consumers. Even to the point where the fire official, he had been a defense witness in a lot of cases for people accused of arson. They didn't dump gasoline on their floor. They used the bug bomb. Eventually, the EPA kind of took a few steps forward to improve warning labels. But as expected, the industry whined, and this is going to be my best industry voice. It's a burden. The costs will be too high. If we improve warning labels, consumers will be confused. So POGO's job at the time was to tip the scale in the public's favor, and we did just that. Mine didn't have the old this one had the newer binding on it, so this is like this was a year after your report. But in May 1994, POGO released a 9-page report. It was called, this is when we were allowed to have really cool titles, Aerosols Give Business and Public Big Boom. Where's the protection inside the EPA? And so that report included a lot of information about how the government was sleeping on the job, and it also exposed how the industry was just filled with threats and excuses. It was an industry that was more worried about its bottom line. It was an industry that was more worried about profits. It was not an industry that was all concerned about poor consumers. In fact, we unearthed one document from an industry official, and that document said that his company actually wasn't concerned about fires or explosions caused by aerosol products and bug bombs because their insurance company paid the injury claims. Right, boo. Shame. The report was picked up by a few media outlets. Again, Danielle described it, but I probably spent multiple days running back from the telephone to the fax machine, asking a reporter at AP or the Washington Post if they wanted our press release on aerosols and bug bombs, and then I would go fax it to them, then I would run back and forth. But it was picked up by a few, but we still knew that we were going to have to bug the EPA for a long time to get something done here. Come on, work with me. Despite the attention, the EPA was only crawling along with its new warning labels. Years had passed. Actually, POGO tripled in size at that time. I think we were up to about 8 or 9 employees. And we had actually moved offices, so I think that was the L Street office that Jim was referring to. And I was actually waiting to hear about law school applications. And it was finally in 1998 that the EPA admitted that bug bombs were dangerous and that they were going to do something about it. But as we all know in Washington, D.C., things move very slowly. And so it was many years later, and I actually think I was in my second year of law school, that the EPA finally came out with a warning label that was going to protect bug bomb users. It was going to include language in both English and Spanish, which was a huge upgrade, graphic symbols, because most people don't read labels, and so at that point, kind of Mr. Yuck theory, if they put a big exploding fire thing on there, then at that point, hopefully people would pay attention to it. They were also going to include warning labels about the use of pilot lights, and also how many you could use. The big thing with bug bombs is when you have bugs, you just want them out of there. And so a lot of times people were using a lot more. And prior to this, there was no label on how many bug bombs you could use at one time. And so they put in a label that would actually dictate how many you could use per square foot. We had pestered the EPA just enough. And we finally got the EPA to tell the industry to bug off. And if that wasn't enough, the old mad scientists that were on the TV program Mythbusters actually tested bug bombs. And they tested the myth because they had heard rumors about bug bombs causing people's houses to explode. The result of their testing was that when they used multiple bug bombs, which was often the case when it came to common practice by people that were using them, the house actually exploded and the sliding door was violently catapulted into the backyard. Just to prove that this story isn't made up, here's a small clip of that show's experiment.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Wow. I didn't see that episode until many years after it ran. I think it was about the time I think my children were into the program, and we caught a rerun probably 2 or 3 years after that finally appeared. And all this work, POGO was first exposed it in a report, we worked on all the public comments, and we were really pushing this issue. Even after I left, I still followed it while I was in my first and second year of law school. But I always felt a sense of pride when I saw that episode of that program. Our sources were vindicated. The EPA and the aerosol manufacturers were exposed, but POGO's work led to a solution, and that solution made the public safer for it. Thank you.